Welcome to the On Deck Show, a show that takes a look at people and organizations that are working to make things better for folks like you and I every day. This morning, we have the pleasure of speaking with Paul Yetter from the North Baltimore Aquatic Club. We dive into philosophy, some technical aspects of swimming. We talk a lot about club development and really dive into the parallels between athletic development and human development. Great interview, great talk. Check it out. Back at North Baltimore, that's where you started, and that genesis is kind of where I want to start in terms of talking about where you've got to now as your coach. So you've been through, several, great programs. You've achieved a lot in your career at multiple levels, and we're going to come back to that in greater detail later on. But just a really high level description. What did you take from Auburn, Florida, NBA, North Baltimore? Like, a couple of words on each, maybe to start.
Well, it's cliche to say, I think, at times, but I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of great people, a lot of great coaches. And, that's why, what I'm doing right now with MBAC is just one part of what I'm doing with my coaching career, because I'm actually working with coaches online and, just trying to help the coaching community get better like you are. So, having worked with all these different people, and some of them are coaches and some of them are people that are just kind of around those particular squads. That's been the best thing. I learned from Coach Bowman. Just basically, I had the experience of day to day with Coach Bowman when Michael Phelps was a 16, 17-year-old athlete, and that's super valuable. I learned from Murray Stevens as a swimmer, and he was coaching people who were setting world records and winning gold medals. So I was involved in the program that was producing these types of performances. And then at Auburn, I learned so much about myself because there's so many things that I would, if I could go back and do it again, I would do over differently, much differently. I learned about the power of optimism, and the poison of pessimism at that particular year, brought on by me being pessimistic throughout the year. So, after that year, there was, so much learning that happened, as I went to T2 Aquatics in Naples, Florida. And then there I learned so much about leading a team, because this was really with Kevin Erndl and then eventually my brother Tom. This was our team. And we were, really trying to start a new thing and a new culture, which is a lot different than what I was, compared to what I was doing at the North Baltimore Aquatic Club, which is so rich in tradition and culture. And starting a new tradition and culture was a completely different thing. And, a really valuable thing for me as a coach to have done. And now that I'm back at MBAC, having had all these experiences, I feel like I'm, more equipped in so many different ways to coach the athletes that I coach each day.
Interesting. I'm just taking notes on the power of optimism versus, I call it the villainy of pessimism, and I want to come back to that because that was really interesting. But continuing to build on the beginning and the genesis. So you were a swimmer at North Baltimore to start, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I moved to MBAC when I was a freshman in high school,
Fair enough. So what year was that?
1990.
Yeah. So you were, like, like you were swimming there when, and not to say that it isn't still, but like the world had, a spotlight on North Baltimore. What was it like swimming there? Would you say that there was a culture of excellence, or what would you call it?
It was pretty wild. I had an experience, as a younger, like middle school person on another team, the Bowie Bulldog Swim Club, which was also a great culture, and a high level of focus and concentration was brought to the deck each day. So when I went to MBAC, it was definitely a change, but I was ready for it, and I was used to that kind of forward thinking. Coach John Mason was my coach at that point in time, and he's still coaching right now in Maryland, in the DC area, and he was a really great influence on me. And then coming to NBAC and like moving to the team, I was like, I was in the Potomac Valley LSC, so I was moving to a completely different, the Maryland LSC. I was moving to a completely different group of meets, and I really didn't have any idea what NBAC was all about. And I got there and I was like, who are these people? I really didn't understand the tradition when I got there. And I mean, I did a little bit. I was moving there in part because I was changing into a different high school. I was going to high school 45 minutes away from my home, and that's where MBAC was based, Loyola High School. And so I'm like, I'm there, and I'm like, Anita Nall's there, and she had been there for probably a year, and I'm like, who is this amazing breaststroker and this really hard worker? And then as the years went by, Beth Botsford was pretty young, and I'm like, I got her autograph when she was 10 years old at a meet. She signed my heat sheet, and it was just clear this kid was going to be amazing. And these are just two of the female athletes that were there at the time that were amazing. And I think it was 5 girls that won the 1995 long course nationals. So these were all the athletes that I came up with. And so, I learned like, how to swim really fast in practice. I think that NBAC has always valued swimming fast in practice, and we've valued it. We've swum fast in practice over the course of longer workouts than I think people are used to swimming fast within. It's really interesting. We think about USRPT, race pace training, and this type of thing, and I just kind of laughed to myself because I think we're doing a lot of that sort of thing at MBAC, and we have done it for a long time. We've just done it over the course of longer workouts, longer repeats, and like we're getting a lot of race pace training. Sometimes we're getting 300 yards of a 500 of race pace training, which I think is somewhat unique. It's not totally unique to high level USA swimming teams, but it's unique. I know it's unique because when people move to our teams from other clubs and just kind of join our squad, they're like, wow, this is a lot different.
That's really interesting, and I guess I want to get your take on that because I wasn't planning on getting too much into the technical side of things, but I'm glad you brought up the ultra short race pace training, because I want to share an example and kind of let you share your thoughts on it. So years ago, back in I guess 2005, 2006, I had the opportunity to do an apprenticeship down at the Queensland Academy of Sport, and at the time, coach there was Stefan Widmer, and you had Libby Lenton and Christian Springer and Liesl Jones and all those there. So it was a fantastic opportunity. But I got down there after I'd only been a coach for about 4 years, but I had this kind of like insatiable thirst to learn, and I need to know more about this, right? Yeah. And was able to parlay this opportunity. Got down there thinking I knew something about swimming, to jump on deck and realize like I knew nothing about it, right? Like this was a whole new world, right? All that to say, Stefan was he was running what they call at that time reverse periodization, which is what the U.S. and other countries kind of coined ultra short race pace training. Where I want to bridge this and where I'd like to get your kind of take on it, seeing as the example you just gave from North Baltimore, where this is something you guys had always been doing, right? So now it's got a trendy name, ultra short race pace training. Talk to me about the forward thinking that you mentioned before that led to this happening, and really, I guess if you could say, North Baltimore and teams as such, being so far in front of the pack in that regard.
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the question, like the forward thinking part of it.
Well, forward thinkers, you're ahead of this, right? You're ahead of
right. And just to be clear, we cranked the yards too,
Yes.
And my point is that we were doing. I mean, when I was swimming, we were going 9,000 yards to sometimes 13 or 14,000 yards on a weekend day, and we were doing a lot of doubles and just training a number of times a week doing that. And I'd say early 2000s with my training group, we were swimming 7 to 9,000 yards per per most of the practice. And at the end of it, we're swimming really fast. And at the beginning of it, we're at times swimming pretty fast. And we're, sometimes at the beginning of it, we're swimming really fast. If we're working on speed, we're going to do that first. But then we might do something at the end that's we've done things like 1,000 or a 2,000 fartlek, like 50 moderate, 50 fast. And that 50 fast correlates with what these athletes are doing in terms of their goal pace for their 1,000, their 1,650, or their 500. So
Yeah,
we've,
fair.
yeah, and we just take it really serious that they've got to actually swim, at the pace, to race well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I mean, so that's great, and that really sets up. We talked about the environment and whatnot. The culture at North Baltimore. You alluded to that when you in an earlier statement. We talked about you got there were traditions, and you were like, "What are these traditions?" Can you expand on that, unpack that a little bit more?
Well, at that point, we were training out of Loyola High School, and we trained in sort of the typical basement high school pool. And there was a picture of Teresa Andrews, who had just, at that point, pretty recently won the gold medal in the 100 backstroke. And there was that picture, and really that was it. Very soon after that, in 1995, we moved to Meadowbrook Swim Club. And at that point, 1996 happened. We had two Olympians in 1996. We had an Olympian, Anita Nall. Her picture ended up going up at Loyola as well. So there was a second picture there for a couple of years. And then all of these pictures, they ended up going up onto the wall at Meadowbrook, which is, a 50-meter pool that, we would break in. We would have a bulkhead, so we would train generally on one side of the pool. And the pictures would sort of start in the middle. And there was one point in time when one of the younger athletes, and this speaks to the tradition and the culture, said to my brother, who was on the bulkhead, and the bulkhead was kind of in the middle of the 50-meter pool. So he was sort of like on this island in the middle of the pool, and she was in the pool right there. And she looked up at the wall and she said to Tom, Tom, once we run out of room, where are the pictures going to go? And so, this athlete was 8. And since they got this sense of we're all about to be part of this thing, or have a shot to be part of this thing. And so I think that kind of idea was people weren't scared of thinking like that. Even if you were an age group coach 8 and unders, coach 13 14s, didn't really matter. Everybody was like, yeah, let's do this. I think sometimes in swimming, and probably in all aspects of life, there's shaming that goes on within organizations. And at MBAC, one thing that we don't do is shame people for going fast. And I think that happens sometimes. You get people within lanes that talk, and if somebody real early in the practice is going to do something pretty good, maybe they're going to get a little bit of an elbow, from somebody saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't be going so fast so early. And our comment is well, what's fast? Let's redefine fast. And we spent some time with the Australian coaches and athletes. I mean, we all heard that Grant Hackett and people like him were swimming long course minutes as their threshold pace or their cruise pace or whatever. They can just do this all day. It's you kind of have to reconfigure and recalibrate what you think is actually good and what you think is actually fast. I think there's the flipping of a switch and changing your overall mindset has a much bigger impact on athletes than just kind of the daily grind of getting a little bit better each day. Of course, you have to do that. I mean, the 1% better each day rule does apply, but having a major shift and a flip of a switch, what, I'm sick of being slow, I'm going fast. This is the kind of thing that I think at MBAC people have.
That's really interesting, and that was really impactful what you said about the perspective of an 8-year-old. And so, where does that inclusivity? Where does that call it? I would call it a growth mindset, but how that becomes contagious, and how does that become contagious?
I think in that particular point in time at MBAC, we had it set up where we had little kids, younger athletes that were training in between the time that older athletes were training. So the oldest and the top athletes, the best athletes on MBAC, they were training right after school. They would end at 6:15, and then for the next 45 to 60 minutes was, our youngest kids. And so they would be literally talking with Michael Phelps as he was getting out of the pool and they were getting into the pool. And then some other pretty high level athletes would be coming in after them, some high school athletes that were coming in at 7:30 at night, having presumably already done their homework, and managing their time, and the sun's down, and they're coming in and they're jumping in for practice. These kids are like, hey, my kids right now, my own kids are 10 and 6, and they both swim for MBAC. And it's been amazing because I am the least pushy parent. I'm among the least pushy parents on our team. And my kid swam when she was 7, my 10-year-old, and then she swam for a year and quit, whatever. She came back into it. These kids couldn't be more into what it is that they're doing. They're building an identity as somebody who gets their work done. And sometimes it's late at night. They don't think it's weird to go to practice after the sun's down and be done at 8:30, and my 10-year-old has to take care of her homework and go get it done. So, a lot of people have to do that throughout USA Swimming. I don't think that's unique to our team, but I do think the attitude with which kids on our team are kind of like going through that is possibly unique.
Oh, that's quite interesting. So, um, where now you went through this transition of going to Auburn, Florida, coming back to NBAC. How much symmetry did you see with those moves in these teams that you went to, and maybe expand a little bit more about in Florida, because you mentioned before about how you were you were creating a new team, implementing a new culture. What is it like to grow that culture? How did you
Yeah.
do that?
Well, I mean, quickly on Auburn. Auburn was another one with great tradition. So then, by the time I got to Florida, I had been involved with MBAC as a swimmer and a coach, and then also at Auburn, where the tradition, it's really the same thing. I mean, you've got the record board, and then below the record board, you've got people who were on the Auburn team, who were medalists at the Olympics, and the color of their medal and a medal right by their name. It's really awesome. So going to Florida and really taking part in the beginning of T2 Aquatics was so different. I mean, it couldn't have been any more different. There were kids that were coming in off the street that were never swimmers. I mean, we had kids that were coming in that were doing the first practice with earphones in, listening to like a radio that they had on the deck, that kind of thing. I was in the water teaching kids how to swim, teaching kids how to do flip turns and that kind of thing. To just, we had kids in the area that were at the pool that were part of a satellite team that was really kind of just like, it's a really long story how the actual thing started. But there were kids there that could swim, but the fact that we had a lot of new people. And so we would be just really trying to teach the sport. And, in a lot of ways, for me as a coach at the time, it was super energizing to go into teach the sport mode. I was just like trying to sell going to practice, trying to sell getting there on a Saturday was part of it. We would have we would have sometimes 30% of the senior group there on Saturday when I first got there. So it was a really tough thing to be able to teach and really fun to do so. I know you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan.
That's no
We
secret.
I would actually talk a little bit about the Baltimore Ravens because
Of course.
we I was watching at that point. It wasn't a brand new franchise, it was the Browns franchise, but it was a new thing, and it was a new uh, just a completely new thing in 1996 for them. And they ended up winning the Super Bowl in 2000, 2001. And, I thought that was pretty quick. I mean, it wasn't a true expansion franchise, but still it was pretty quick, I think, for the city who didn't have a team since 1981 to embrace this thing. And they really used that build a new culture thing to their advantage. And they talked a lot about that at that time. Like we're going to start something new and this is how it's going to be. We're going to establish a certain type of way of playing football. So for us at T2, we thought a lot about that. Like we're going to establish our way of doing things. And, I think that with my brother moving there, and, that was fairly early on, we took a lot of what we learned at MBAC to T2 Aquatics and joined it with, I think Kevin Erndl, who's the president of the team, he brings a lot to the organization as well. And so we sort of merged that together. Of course, at that time, Erica Erndl was she was our best swimmer at the time, and she swam very well through those years. So as an older person, in her 30s, she was also someone who, you know, was a big contributor to the building of the overall culture of the team.
Hmm. Interesting. And across all those opportunities, and then those opportunities to coach at those great programs, like I know that you're a very well thought out individual. You're thoughtful. You take time to think about things, and so on and so forth. So, from a macro point of view, from a high level point of view, what is success to you?
Well, that I think has changed over time. My definition of success, and I would say that that's a really tough question. It's a pretty broad question, but I'd say for people to reach their full potential is something that I'm trying to help them achieve. I would say that over time, that idea of what someone's full potential and full ability to actualize their full potential has definitely changed. It's a little bit more holistic now, although I can't say that before I was not trying to be holistic with, my coaching style and my athletes. I'm just older and better at, doing the things that I'd like to do in terms of that now, more so than ever. So, getting athletes to swim fast is certainly part of it, but athletes who can then reflect on that fast swimming as part of their lives is something that I think is a huge deal. It's something that we say, within our crew, that we want to be people who swim, not swimmers who people. We want to be the person who swims, not the swimmer who persons. It's something that we, I've noticed, over time that people will get a little bit weird with their outlook on their lives and their swimming or their athletics, and that part of their lives. And, I think people get a little sick of it themselves, in some ways. And so it's like I've had enough of this. So I think that to get really happy with oneself throughout the sport of swimming or throughout any type of pursuit, you want to constantly be able to reflect, how you're doing onto yourself in an accurate way. I think the problem is the inaccuracy of people's own reflection of how they're doing. And I think as coaches, we can help them with that. So I've probably gotten better at helping people really see, how well they're doing, when they're doing well, where it is that they need to improve, if they need to improve some things. But, I think that maybe that answers your question. I've said to my athletes about the idea that, and I've learned this from watching athletes do it, and probably look, as a coach, you have to get your athletes to buy into the sport and have an identity of, as I mentioned before with my daughter, being a swimmer, or being an athlete. They have to build up kind of this identity within themselves that this is who I am, this is what I'm about, and that identity fuels the going to practice, starting at however many times a week it is for an age grouper, up to 8, 9, 10 times a week. If you don't have, this thing as an adolescent, growing up as a teenager, like where you've got this thing that you're a part of and it's part of you, and you're doing this thing, it's really hard to stay consistent and then get something out of it, because it's the getting something out of it that helps these swimmers and these people build up their sense of confidence and that kind of thing. So, having seen people, build up that identity to such a point where it's hard to sort of like release it and understand that you're actually bigger than that and different than and more than that. You're a person who swims, not a swimmer who persons. And then it's the swimmer who persons or it's the person who swims that can, at the end of the day, really, be the great athlete. Because the person is way more powerful than just the mere athlete. So, if the person is in charge of everything, so to speak, then the athletic side of things can really come to fruition. But if you haven't really developed that person side of yourself, then it's hard for you to control things just from being sort of this like athlete that has nothing else going on in life. So it's just something that I try to help athletes with, and I think I've probably improved over time. Just I think as a lot of coaches do as they get older.
It was an incredibly thoughtful answer you gave on what is success and what is your definition of success and so on and so forth. And the one thing that I guess what stood out to me is what you described, and you put it the person who swims, not the swimmer who persons, and that's a great. I'm going to call that Apollism. But that said, like what you articulated, like those are really skills for life. Like you could be, a student struggling through school. You could be a professional. You could be a single parent. You could be, a normal family, like a traditional family, call it, whatever traditional means these days. And like all those lessons that you put out there, like they would all apply in those scenarios. So with that said, what somebody coming through and working with your program, what do they leave and go on to do? I know it's a little bit too much of a general question, but I mean, like, if they leave there with those skills that you've just described, what are they going on to do?
Well, I can answer that question two ways. Like, what have they actually gone on to do, and what are they actually doing? Well, I mean, the athletes that I've coached have done what a lot of athletes have done. They've gone on to, have families and have careers and have success in all these different areas, and they've gone on to, serve the U.S. military. They've gone on to become doctors and lawyers. They've gone on to become swimming coaches. They've gone on to do, a lot of things. I think really the question is what are we trying to do? What are we trying to get at our student athletes and the people that we coach to be able to do, and how flexible can we sort of help them become with life and with all that life can have in store for people. And I think that outlook is something that I think just having the outlook, having the intent on the daily and weekly basis with the people that we work with to help them see the big picture is really a big part of it as a coach.
Interesting. So that said, just in terms of how that extends to what you're currently doing, because I know you apart from being a coach, like you're also involved in helping coaches become better coaches and the overall swimming community become better. Talk to me a little bit about what you're doing there. Maybe give yourself a plug in terms of where people can find you, how they can help, how you can help them, and stuff like that.
Sure.
And talk about why is it important for you that other people reach their full potential.
Well, in terms of, I can go back to that last part of the question and address that. But in terms of for me, like working with coaches. and helping other coaches get better is the best way to get my team better. It's like I learned that at T2 Aquatics when I had, all these athletes, and it's like, how am I going to get 55 kids better during the same period of time, or 30 kids or 25 kids better, over a course of 2 hours? It's really difficult to do. So, having had experiences working with other coaches, I can impart some things onto the coaches that are on my coaching staff. So I really learned that at T2, like, get the coaches better, get them to be into it, in terms of like their daily thing that they do and the way that I'm into it. And truth be told, at T2 Aquatics, when I had that large group and only a small portion of them were, I felt like really, kind of like helping drive that culture of excellence on a daily basis. I was like, I have no choice. I have no choice but to really start working with other coaches, and making sure that, like, I got to get like one or two other coaches who are standing over there and over there who are able to do a similar type of thing that I'm doing in terms of the practices and that kind of thing, but also have the same sort of basic mentality towards the building of a certain type of culture within our organization. So then I was like, this everything is kind of online, and it's to me, like, I felt like it was an opportunity. So what I did was I created a high school coaches course, and Chris Ritter at Ritter Sports Performance and now Surge Strength, so that it's kind of changed over time. He was doing some stuff online, and we were talking through. He was doing at that point podcast interviews with coaches, so we were doing some stuff, and I actually just kind of like mentioned this to him, and then we linked up, and then I sold this high school coaches course, through his platform, and then I did kind of an advanced thing that was like a private Facebook page. Had a lot of fun just like throwing stuff out there, and then now it's kind of evolved into what we call the mentorship program, which is basically it's a group of coaches that every 2 weeks get on a call, and then some of them get on a call in smaller groups at different points in time. But the main thing that I do is I run these every 2 weeks Zoom calls, and so sometimes we've had total like 4 or 5 guests, but generally we're talking on a topic and we're having either a discussion or I'm throwing some stuff out there. Like recently we've talked about backstroke development, and we just break it down. Before that, we had John Nelson from the York Y on, and he broke down his squad and like what makes his culture so good. And then the week before that, we talked about the 200 freestyle, specifically that event, and things to do in training and in preparation to get ready for a great 200 freestyle. Now we go through all kinds of topics. Some of them are a little bit more in terms of the sports psychology side of things. The things that I've mentioned are X's and O's. So I really like doing that. I think it's a fun outlet. And I mean, I've been doing this now it's been about 2 years, and it's like every week and every 2 weeks when we're talking through subjects, I'm getting more ideas to use with the squad that I coach right now. So it's been a really great kind of just thing that's happened over the last couple of years with that.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Now, before we go any further, so like, who has access to that? Is this an open group? Is it like, obviously this is part of the business you run, correct?
It's part of Chris Ritter's business. So you've got to be part of what is called the Hive. These sorts of things can, they can change. Chris and I are talking about how things are sort of changing. And so who knows, at some point in time, the name could be different and that sort of thing. But right now, yeah, there's a part of Chris's website called the Hive that has all these videos, and I mean, almost like back in the flow swimming days when you had like access to like what's going on the deck. I mean, Chris is interviewing coaches like Todd DeSorbo and Jack Bowerly for like an hour in their office, that kind of thing. I mean, these are from a few years back, and like these sorts of things are, I mean, it's just a few things that are within the library of the Hive. So the Hive has got sort of like everything in it. And once you're bought in, it's a yearly membership thing. Once you're bought into that, then you sort of apply. Everybody gets accepted, but you sort of go through this application, submit, and then you're on the list, and then you start to come into the Zoom calls. You get the invite, and we use Slack. We use an app called Slack, and so we upload all of our recordings, and we sometimes we throw things out and have discussions and everything.
Um, I'm really interested in this group because like this sounds like a fantastic resource for coaches.
Yeah,
So
it's
I'm gonna make sure to include the links and everything in here so people can see it. We'll include it in the show notes as well, so people can link to it as well.
Yeah, I think at this point, part of the power that we have within our group is the private nature of the group. So we're not having discussions that I'm then kicking out onto social media. So the depths within which we can travel in the groups, in that group is deeper than something that you mentioned that you spent some time in Queensland. So like through I don't know where I got it. So like I have, for instance, like a speed chart from the Queensland Academy of Sport. So
Oh yeah,
I'll
classic
show this on my
document.
phone. So like I've got this chart that tells you where you got to be at 15 meters off the wall, in the 100 if you want to go a certain time and that kind of thing. And of course, you can't use this stuff. You can, but it's even more accurate if you actually get videos of your own swimmers and you figure out where they are off of 15. So we talk about things like that. We talk about I'll kick resources out to people. And we'll talk about how to use the resources and then how to take the resources to another level. Like getting a video on your kids. I mean, anytime USA Swimming is going to put something on YouTube that's got one of my swimmers swimming, then I've got the ability to look at the 15-meter mark, figure out where the halfway mark is, and actually get some metrics on them. And I don't do that with everybody, but if I've got somebody that's a junior national A finalist or higher, then I'll start, going to those lengths to get people to the next level.
Yeah, that's a brilliant man. That's a flashback from the past. Those speed
Hmm.
charts,
Yeah.
like that. I believe like that was one of the, from the Queensland Academy of Sport. Like that was one of Stefan's creations.
I tried to steal
Um,
as much as I could from those guys or anybody that I could steal it from. And at that point, they were doing pretty well. They've
yeah,
been doing pretty well, but at that point, there were a few coaches down there that were crushing it, and I have no idea how I got those charts, but yeah.
yeah. I mean, there was a lot of it that was going around, and but I mean that also speaks to the level of collaboration with people that are kind of securely in their persons, if you will, and they understand that for me to get better, everybody gets better, I get better, and understanding the holistic nature of that. And I think that's one of the things that I found most interesting about your kind of approach to everything. Like it's never about the individual; it's always about the community. It's always about the group. Maybe just your thoughts on that.
Well, I think as coaches, one thing, well, I'll speak personally for me. I certainly remember. I mean, I remember all the really fast swims, records being set. I mean, medals being won, things like that, or things that I'm proud of, and I'm proud of the athletes that I've coached, have done these things. But it's some of the other performances that really aren't even the highest level athletes I've worked with that are like the things I really, have had kind of that reaction to on the pool deck or whatever, like, yeah, like that was a really great performance. And I think that speaks to the idea, like that's when somebody's really, reaching their full potential, not just in the pool but out of the pool, and they're reflecting it back on themselves in the right way. I feel like maybe that is the thing that when it happens, I feel like as a coach, like I feel good about that, I feel even better about that than just the performance.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, like, bridging from there, I know that again, like one of the things, and this is my what I took from what I read. So if I've misrepresented it, please let me know. But your belief that experience and working with others, learning from others, is more valuable than I call it the theoretical approach, like the interaction and what you learn by kind of trying, failing, succeeding, any combination, on the route there is probably the most valuable way to go when it comes to coaching.
Well, I think all those things are I think you're on with that, but I think about coaches who do so well without having been mentored. You know, where I think about Lydia Jacoby's coach, and I'm sorry that I don't know the coach's name, but much respect. That coach, and I also don't know this for sure, but presumably, hasn't had an Olympic athlete before.
She was the swimmer from Alaska.
What's that?
She's the swimmer from Alaska.
Lydia Jacoby. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And, I think about like back in the time that I started coaching, I think about Sharon Powers from Maine, from Ian Crocker's coach.
Hmm.
And really, I guess I don't know for sure. Perhaps Coach Powers had a mentor that I don't know of. But I think these are just examples, and some are going to be on and some are going to be off. Or actually, did these coaches have mentors or not? But of course, your mentor could be your parents or a coach from another sport or something like that as well. But you can, as a coach, with belief that you can do it, coach somebody to go really fast, even though you haven't actually had the experience doing it, and you don't really have any experience, watching anybody do it. I do think though that you have a leg up, if you've had the experience. But you know, coaches all the time are getting athletes to really high levels that are doing it out of teams that have never had anybody do that before.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. Um, and I guess moving on from there, just in terms of you know, uh, I guess moving to wrap this up, because I mean, like we've kind of gone all over the place, and you've shared a lot of really insightful information on the process, the development process as a coach, um, insights from your experiences in Florida, Auburn, North Baltimore, the environment in North Baltimore, and so on and so forth. Some great examples as well. Um, I guess in terms of you know building a better coach and building a better human, talk to me, and let's close off with the evolution of Paul the coach, but also the evolution of Paul the person, the father, the family man. Let's like round this off nicely for us.
Well, I guess specifically, where can I start? I mean, where would you like me to go with that?
Well, I guess it is a very broad question. I mean, you know, what has what has led you to become the insightful coach that understands that success is something different to everybody and for everybody, um, and comfortable and understanding that um, the success of others doesn't define your success or your version of success or your definition of success. And then also, as a person, as an individual, as a father, um, how do those lessons, how does that impact your interactions with the people closest to
Well, I think I've always it's pretty broad. I'm going to go for it though. I've always been somebody who likes to have fun, likes to have days where I feel like I've gotten stuff done, and I think that being relaxed is part of that. And so like I actually disagree sometimes with people who say your mind controls your body. Um, I really feel like your body controls your mind, which then in turn controls your body, and it's more of a cyclic thing. So, with how I try to approach leadership as a coach and as a father, husband, all that kind of stuff, I try to make sure that people can feel their greatness throughout each day. So with my girls at home, there's uh, you know, trying to get them to notice, all of their great things, how smart they are, how beautiful they are, how all of these things that kids and young girls need to hear from their dads. Um, and I think that, with the athletes, it's kind of like, I want them to see their power. I want them to be able to actually like access that power, not only in swimming, but as you've spoken about earlier in in life, like later in life, can they access that power, as they're doing whatever they're doing when they're in their 30s, 40s, and beyond. So that's the thing as a coach that makes me feel good, and as a parent or as just a person that's walking the earth, feel good. I like to have experiences each day that make me feel like I'm part of kind of a unified thing with this planet, moving in the right direction. So we all can affect each other and do affect each other, every single day. We sort of we live in a way where the actions that we take and the things that we say, and these things all like really matter. They matter to us, and certainly the things that we think and say create chemical changes within our own bodies, and also within our minds and our nervous systems. But it also does the same with other people. Other people are getting all of that as well. I think there's something to be said about, it's, maybe a little bit deep for this particular conversation, but hey, let's go there. Uh, we often hear about the look in the eyes. Well, let me go back. We hear about how people who grow old together end up looking like each other. And I've actually heard that with pets, where you end up like pets look like their owners and that kind of thing. And I believe that it's the look in each other's eyes that you throughout time end up mirroring, and end up kind of like, copying. And so, within families, clearly that's something that is at play. But I think within organizations, like within swimming teams, the look of confidence and the look of fear are a lot different. So I think, trying to create an environment where we've got a lot of people who have the look of confidence and the look of sort of being predators, as opposed to prey, and that kind of thing, like within the organization, I think it sort of like feeds, uh, you know, on itself, right? So it's a very really broad question, but I think like that's what I'm trying to bring to whether it be my family or whether it be the organization that I'm working within. Like trying to create that where everybody's sort of looking into each other's eyes and mimicking the look of confidence and mimicking the look of I can do this. That comes not only through speaking, but like just really subtly through actions and also through time. We end up working with kids, pretty much every day of the year for 3 or 4 straight years, or sometimes more than that. So I think there's sometimes the coaches have a really key impact into the overall growing up of these young people.
It's a brilliant answer. I mean, a couple of times I've kind of thrown these big chunky questions at you, and like you've dissected them really nicely and come back with a really, thoughtful, concise answer. So I really appreciate that, and I definitely appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. We've never met before, but I definitely, I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk with you today, and look forward to connecting again with you again in the future.
Great talking with you too, Jason. Good meeting you, and look forward to seeing you on the deck sometime, maybe, or whatever wherever our paths take us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for tuning in. If you like the content that we've been creating, make sure you check it out here.